Well, for more on what's driving these trade tensions, Karina spoke with Anne Madeira. She's an assistant professor of political science at Queen's College at CUNY in New York. Karina started off by asking her if the US and China are already in a trade war.
I don't think we're in a trade war yet. I'm hoping that this is just some temporary economic hardball that both sides are playing to try to force a compromise and bring both sides to the negotiating table.
When was the last time the U.S. found itself in a trade war?
Well, the whole world, in fact, found itself in a trade war in the 1930s during the period between World War I and World War II. And this was sparked by protectionist measures that the U.S. implemented during the Great Depression. The U.S. wanted to protect struggling U.S. farmers, so it enacted a limited agricultural trade protection bill, which then ballooned into a massive trade protection bill that raised tariffs on over 20,000 imported agricultural and manufactured products. So the rest of the world responded immediately with retaliatory tariffs, and this was when the trade war really started. So Canada and a lot of our European trading partners erected these retaliatory tariffs, and global trade plunged by about 2/3 at that time. So global trade really collapsed, and that increased economic tensions between countries, and experts think that these hostilities were a factor in the outbreak of World War II.
Okay, so it went from a trade war to a real war. I mean, I guess that's the ultimate fear with trade wars, right? Is that it spills into other types of conflicts?
It is the ultimate fear. A trade war can cause a global economic recession, first of all, certainly. Our economies are so linked right now. We're so interdependent with each other through trade and also through our global supply chains. So a trade war, first of all, can cause economic crisis, and a trade war between the U.S. and China would not be limited to just U.S. and China. The economic damages would be felt around the world because of the complex nature of global supply chains. But I think that the even greater risk of a trade war goes beyond just the economic risk, and that is the fact that history shows us that trade likely leads to peace, and trade creates a powerful economic incentive for countries to maintain peaceful relationships with each other. It becomes more costly to engage in war when it would disrupt trade between you and an important trading partner.
Donald Trump has tweeted that trade wars are good and they're easy to win. Given your research, do you think that's true?
The lesson from history is that that's absolutely not true. Trade wars are bad and they're difficult to win. We know that trade is good because it enlarges the size of countries' economies who engage in trade. And even if a trading partner gains relatively more than you from a trade relationship, it's still worthwhile to engage in trade. Trade wars lead to the collapse of international trade, and that shrinks the size of economies. So through a trade war, Donald Trump is hoping that perhaps eventually he can extract concessions from China on some of these issues that he's concerned about, like intellectual property rights. But in the meantime, he would be shrinking the size of the U.S. economy, and that's likely not economically worthwhile. Even if China is engaging in some unfair trade practices, it's probably economically worthwhile for us to continue to trade with China as we have been and try to pursue legal forms of dispute resolution with China, such as through the World Trade Organization.
So the Trump administration, though, believes that the U.S. has gotten a raw deal on global trade, particularly in trade with China. Mm-hmm. And what he says he's trying to do is create fairer trade. Mm-hmm. Now, critics will say the World Trade Organization takes too long to get things accomplished. Mm-hmm. So what other ways are there, other than in a trade war, to sort of resolve these issues?
Right. So if going through the World Trade Organization is not effective, as perhaps it isn't, because past U.S. administrations have also pursued some of these grievances against China through the WTO to little effect. So a better strategy than starting a trade war would have been for Donald Trump to attempt to assemble a coalition with other important U.S. trading partners who are also concerned about these same issues, such as Japan and South Korea and the EU countries. Unfortunately, Donald Trump has alienated these countries and has painted them as trade adversaries themselves. So he's unlikely to be able to form the kind of coalition with them now that would have perhaps been more effective in putting pressure on China.
Given what we know about Donald Trump and his style of governing, do you think he's serious about potentially entering into a trade war, or is this his style of bargaining?
It's really tough to say what's going on behind the scenes in this administration and whether some of the seeming chaos is part of a grand strategy aimed at forcing compromise, or if the Trump administration simply doesn't know the lessons of history and the lessons of past trade wars. So I think there is reason to imagine that these policies may be reversed. The Trump administration has already reversed himself on the steel and aluminum tariffs that were initially imposed on all of our trading partners. He's already reversed that for 7 of our trading partners. He's now granted them exceptions to those tariffs. So I would not be surprised if he reverses himself on the tariffs in general.